In the winter of 1959, deep in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia, a group of young adventurers embarked on a journey that would become one of the most chilling mysteries of the 20th century. Their destination was a remote and icy region known to the native Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, which translates ominously to Dead Mountain. It wasn't called that for nothing. The group consisted of 10 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. They were students and recent graduates, all highly skilled in trekking through extreme cold and harsh terrains. The expedition was meant to earn them a Grade 3 certification in ski hiking, the highest possible at the time in the Soviet Union. Leading the expedition was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a smart and respected engineering student. He was known for his careful planning, his strong leadership, and his unshakable calm under pressure. The others trusted him completely. The team included 8 men and 2 women, all in their 20s, full of youth and idealism. Some were studying engineering, others radio science, economics, or civil construction. But they shared a passion for nature and survival against the odds. They departed from Sverdlovsk, modern-day Yekaterinburg, by train on January 23, 1959. Spirits were high, and they took photos along the way, laughing, singing, writing in their journals. Nothing suggested they were heading toward disaster. By January 27th, they had reached the edge of civilization. That day, one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and had to turn back. He would be the only survivor. The remaining 9 pushed forward into the snow-covered wilderness. They followed a road through the northern Ural Mountains toward Otorten, a peak far more challenging than Dead Mountain itself. But fate had other plans. The group made good progress at first. They kept detailed journals and took many photos, some of which would later become crucial in piecing together what happened. Their last camp was set up on February 1st on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl. For reasons that still baffle investigators, they pitched their tent on an exposed slope, rather than in the safer woods just 1.5 kilometers downhill. Some believe they didn't want to lose altitude they had already gained. Others think they may have been disoriented. It was a brutal night, with temperatures dropping below -25 degrees Celsius. Winds howled across the barren mountain, and darkness swallowed everything. The hikers cooked a simple dinner, made journal entries, and settled into their tent for the night. They had no idea it would be their last. The next morning, they did not check in. No one heard from them again. Back home, days passed with no word. Families began to worry, but delays were not uncommon on such remote expeditions. Still, concern slowly turned into dread. By February 20th, when the group was more than a week overdue, a search party was dispatched. It included fellow students, local volunteers, and eventually the military. What they found would haunt Russia for decades. On February 26th, rescuers spotted the group's abandoned tent. High up the slope of Dead Mountain, it was partially collapsed, covered in snow, and eerily silent. When they examined it, their confusion deepened. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. It looked as though the hikers had cut their way out in panic, and they had fled without proper clothes or shoes. Tracks in the snow showed bare footprints leading away from the tent. Some were just in socks. Others had only one shoe. The prints led toward a nearby forest about 1.5 kilometers downhill. There, beneath a cedar tree, the first 2 bodies were found. They were lying side by side in their underwear. The men's hands were burned. Above them, branches of the cedar were broken, as if someone had climbed it. Had they tried to spot the tent from above? Or flee something? 3 more bodies were found between the tree and the tent, as if they had been trying to crawl back. All of them showed signs of hypothermia. But it would get worse. The last 4 hikers weren't found until May, buried deep in a ravine. These were the bodies that raised the most disturbing questions, because their injuries didn't match anything natural. One woman had her tongue missing. Her eyes were gone, as if surgically removed. Another had a fractured skull, with no external wound. One man had crushed ribs, injuries comparable to a high-speed car crash. But there were no bruises, no cuts, no signs of attack. How could that be? Investigators were baffled. The official Soviet autopsy described a compelling force as the cause of some injuries. But what kind of force? Animals? Avalanche? An explosion? Stranger still, traces of radiation were found on some of the hikers' clothing, and several of the corpses had orange skin and grayish hair. Theories began to multiply. Some suggested military testing in the area. Others pointed to UFOs or secret weapons. A few even whispered about supernatural forces tied to the mountain. But there was no conclusive evidence, no signs of struggle, no other human footprints, no battle, just frozen bodies and a tent ripped from within. The case was quietly closed. Soviet authorities blamed a compelling natural force. The files were sealed. Yet the questions refused to die. Why did experienced hikers flee barefoot into the snow? Why did they slash their tent? What happened that night on Dead Mountain? Who, or what, frightened them so deeply? And why was no one allowed to investigate further? For decades, the incident was buried in secrecy. Only Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, would speak to the public. He spent his life searching for answers. If I had not gotten sick, I would have died with them, he said. But maybe I would have known the truth. To this day, no one truly knows. But the Dyatlov Pass incident lives on in files, in films, in nightmares. A mystery frozen in time, waiting for light, and our journey into it has just begun. They say history repeats itself, but what about the parts we forgot? Welcome to Echoes of History, the channel where we dig up the dusty corners of the past to uncover the weird, the wild, and the wait, what? Stories they didn't teach you in school. Grab your curiosity and maybe a cup of tea, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. The last known photos of the Dyatlov group show them building their tent on the snowy slope of Kolat-Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, with no sign that anything was amiss. They had left a note inside a storage tent down the mountain, saying they would return by February 12th. But no one knew that this would be the last time they were ever heard from. When they didn't return, families grew worried, and on February 20th, a search party was finally dispatched, volunteers, local police, and eventually the Soviet army joined in, combing the mountain in bitter cold. It wasn't until February 26th that the searchers discovered the tent, and what they found chilled them more than the wind ever could. The tent was half collapsed, buried in snow, and eerily cut open from the inside. All the group's belongings, boots, and coats were still inside, untouched. Whatever had forced them out into the -30. Sea night had come suddenly and had terrified them enough to flee barefoot. Following the trail of footsteps, searchers made a grim discovery in the tree line 1.5 kilometers away. The first two bodies were found under a cedar tree, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both in underwear, no shoes, their hands burned, as if they had tried to climb or start a fire. Between the tent and the tree, 3 more bodies were found: Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin frozen solid, as if trying to crawl back. It would take over 2 more months before the last 4 bodies were located. Buried deep under the snow in a ravine, the remaining 4 Mila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thabobernulis were found with injuries far more disturbing. Lyudmila's ribs were shattered, her tongue missing, and her eyes gone. Semyon and Nikolai also had crushed skulls and chest trauma that experts claim no human could inflict, even stranger. None of the bodies had external wounds consistent with such force. It was as if their bones had been crushed by an intense pressure from within. Investigators compared it to a car crash, except there was no vehicle, no tracks, and no enemies. Their clothing held another mystery. High levels of radiation were detected on some of their garments. Why would hikers carry radioactive material in the mountains? This detail only deepened the sense that something unnatural had occurred. The Soviet investigation, wrapped up quickly in May 1959, concluded that the hikers had died from a compelling natural force. No clarification was ever given, no weather event, no avalanche, no animal attack could explain all the evidence. For decades, the files were locked away, fueling speculation. Some blamed an avalanche, saying it forced the group to flee the tent and succumb to hypothermia. But the slope was not steep enough, and the tent remained largely intact. Others suggested katabatic winds, a rare wind phenomenon that could have induced panic. But again, there was no hard evidence. Then came the more chilling theories: military experiments gone wrong. The area was near a missile testing zone, and some speculated that parachute mines or secret weapons tests could have caused the internal injuries. Could the glowing orbs seen in the sky by nearby hikers that night have been part of it? Soviet secrecy at the time only added to the mystery. Witnesses claimed to see the bodies covered in strange orange hues and that their hair had turned gray. Were they exposed to something they weren't meant to see? Others turned to more supernatural ideas: aliens, yetis, even cursed terrain. Locals long believed the mountain to be haunted, calling it "don't go there" in their native Mansi language. But none of these theories could be proven, and the Soviet files offered no comfort. One of the more disturbing elements was the state of the tent. Why cut it open from the inside? Why leave everything behind, even their shoes and coats? What could cause 9 experienced hikers to panic and run into deadly cold? Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, was a calculated and thoughtful man, not prone to rash decisions. For him to abandon the tent suggested an overwhelming terror some speculated about, infrasound low-frequency vibrations caused by wine potentially triggering panic attacks or hallucinations. A 2013 theory suggested this might explain the sudden fear and erratic behavior. But again, it's just that a theory with no way to test it definitively. The deeper you dig, the stranger it all becomes. Why were there no signs of struggle? Why did some bodies have signs of trauma, while others did not? Why did the search and investigation end so quickly? Survivors' families were left with more questions than answers. They were told not to ask too many questions. Some were even warned to stop investigating. Over time, the Dyatlov Pass became both a symbol of loss and a shrine for mystery seekers. In the years since, hikers and researchers have returned, hoping to unlock the truth, but the mountain keeps its silence. In 2020, the Russian government reopened the case, this time claiming that a rare type of avalanche was to blame. But even then, they could not explain the internal injuries or missing body parts. Critics say this was just a way to close the case for good. The mystery still haunts Russia to this day. It remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved cases in modern history. And as we look at the photos of the smiling hikers frozen in time, we're left wondering, what really happened that night on Dead Mountain? As the Soviet Union's secrecy clouded the investigation, many began to suspect that something sinister had been buried beneath the snow and silence of Dyatlov Pass. Official reports gave vague conclusions, suggesting an unknown compelling force had caused the deaths, fueling speculation rather than calming it. But what kind of force could compel 9-season hikers to flee into freezing temperatures, underdressed and barefoot? One theory posits military involvement. The area was known for missile testing and secret weapons development, and some believe the hikers witnessed something they weren't meant to see. Burn marks on trees and strange discoloration on some victims' clothing only added fuel to the fire. There's the idea of parachute-mined Soviet military devices dropped by air that detonate above ground. These could explain the concussive internal injuries without external wounds, as well as the strange blast-like trauma found in the autopsy. But no official acknowledgement of such testing in the area has ever surfaced. Then there's the radiation. Several victims' clothes were found to have traces of radioactive contamination, an odd detail that was never fully explained by investigators. Was it from exposure to nuclear material, or simply contamination from one of the students who had previously worked at a facility with radioactive isotopes? Another theory pulls us into the realm of espionage. Some believe Dyatlov's group may have included informants or couriers working with Soviet intelligence, possibly involved in a secret exchange or operation gone wrong. This theory leans heavily on circumstantial evidence and the USSR's notorious cloak and dagger tactics. A darker, more mythic idea involves the Mansi people and their lands. Some early whispers suggested the hikers had been attacked for trespassing sacred grounds, but the Mansi themselves were peaceful and had helped in the search efforts. They were never seriously considered suspects. Others point to nature itself. A rare meteorological phenomenon known as a Kármán vortex streak could have produced infrasound low-frequency noise that can induce intense feelings of fear and disorientation. In theory, this infrasound can have triggered panic in the hikers, causing them to flee the tent irrationally. Then there's the avalanche theory. Revived by a 2021 scientific study, researchers suggested a rare slab avalanche might have struck after the hikers cut into the slope to set up camp. The delayed release of snow and sudden force could explain why they fled, the internal injuries, and even the collapsed tent. Yet, many argue that this doesn't fully add up. There were no signs of a significant avalanche in the area, and seasoned hikers like Dyatlov would have known not to camp somewhere dangerous. And what about the body of Lyudmila Dubinina, found with her tongue and eyes missing? Some believe scavenging animals are to blame for the missing facial tissue. Others suspect a more grisly explanation, that these injuries occurred before death or were inflicted by some unknown entity. Either way, the brutality of it unsettles even the most skeptical observers. Over the decades, government documents slowly became declassified and journalists tried to unearth the truth. But what they found was a muddle of conflicting evidence, vanished files, and cryptic witness accounts. Even family members of the victims claimed they were kept in the dark. In 2019, the Russian government officially reopened the case only to conclude once again that a natural event was to blame. This time, they pointed to a slab avalanche, echoing the conclusions of the independent Swiss study. But critics say this explanation is just as unsatisfying as the one from 1959. The mystery remains open in the hearts and minds of many. Books, documentaries, and online forums continue to explore every angle, from the scientific to the supernatural. Each year, new evidence and theories emerge, but none provide the definitive answer. What truly happened on that icy slope in the Ural Mountains? Was it simply a tragic encounter with nature, or something buried deeper in the cold machinery of a secretive regime? Perhaps it was both. Some look to the hikers' own writings diaries and photos recovered from the site for clues. Their last entries show excitement, laughter, even jokes about the journey. There was no indication that doom awaited them just a few hours later. Others scrutinized the final image taken by the group's camera, a blurry photo that some claim shows strange lights or figures. Is it a simple photographic error, or a final snapshot of the unknown? The debate continues for the families. The lack of closure still stings. Many went to their graves without understanding how or why their children died. The cold truth is that no theory fully explains everything. 9 lives were lost, and each theory leaves out one piece of the puzzle. Internal injuries with no external trauma, strange orange skin, radiation, missing eyes and tongue, a tent cut from the inside, and barefoot bodies found miles away in the snow. In the absence of answers, stories fill the silence. They become legends passed from one generation to the next of hikers who walked into the mountains and never returned the same, of a place the locals call Kolytsayakl, Dead Mountain. The name now carries more weight than ever because it's not just a name, it's a grave marker for 9 lives and one enduring mystery. The Soviet authorities arrived swiftly to investigate, But what they found only deepened the mystery, as bodies were recovered from beneath the snow. The story took a dark turn. The last four hikers found months later had the most disturbing injuries. Lead Mila Dibinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol had a shattered skull. Alexander Kolevatov had a deformed neck and extensive chest injuries. The coroner described some of the injuries as being akin to a car crash. Yet there were no external wounds. Corresponding to such massive internal trauma, it didn't seem human hands could have done this. There were no signs of struggle or attack around the bodies. No defensive wounds, no blood, no indication they had fought anyone or anything. Whatever happened had been swift, powerful, and left almost no trace. Radiation was found on some of their clothes, raising even more suspicion. Where could radiation come from in such a remote area? Theories began to emerge, each more speculative than the last. Some claimed they had stumbled upon a secret Soviet military experiment. Others believed they were victims of a classified weapons test gone wrong. There were even suggestions of aliens or paranormal activity. One theory involved infrasound low-frequency sound waves caused by wind passing through the mountain. This could induce panic, disorientation, even hallucinations in humans. Could it have caused them to flee their tent in terror? Another proposed a slab avalanche where snow slides silently and without warning. It could explain the hasty escape and internal injuries, but this didn't align with the minimal external damage and the undisturbed tent site. Some suggested a Yeti or unknown creature had attacked them. While there's no evidence for such a being, the brutality of the scene lent itself to wild speculation. It was the kind of mystery that resisted logic. The Soviet government concluded the group died from a compelling natural force. That vague statement satisfied no one, especially not the families of the victims. Over the decades, family members and independent investigators have continued searching for answers. New expeditions were launched, modern forensic techniques applied, and satellite imagery reanalyzed, but every new piece of information seemed to raise more questions. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. They dismissed all theories except one, an avalanche. They claimed it was the most scientifically sound explanation, but skeptics pointed out that many avalanche conditions weren't present that night. No significant snowfall, no steep slope, and the tent was still partially upright. The bodies weren't scattered as you'd expect in a real avalanche scenario, and there's the issue of the internal injuries far too extreme for a soft snow collapse. There's also the mystery of how some hikers were found wearing clothes from others, or with missing footwear. It all suggested chaos, confusion, and sheer desperation. Some of the victims had climbed trees, as evident from broken branches and bark. Were they looking for something or trying to get away? Others had burns on their hands and feet, with no fire source nearby. And yet, there was no sign of foul play from a third party. No footprints other than those of the group. No weapon marks or defensive wounds. Every theory could explain part of the story, but none could account for everything. The incident defied neat categorization over 60 years. Later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the world's most compelling unsolved cases. It's been the subject of books, films, documentaries, and intense online speculation. It has become more than a tragedy, it's become a modern myth for some. It represents government secrecy and Cold War paranoia. For others, it's a cautionary tale of nature's unforgiving power. And for many, it's simply a chilling riddle with no answer. The pass was renamed in Dyatlov's honor, and every year, people trek there to pay tribute to the hikers to stand where they last stood. Snow still covers the slopes of Dead Mountain. Winds still howl through the trees, just as they did in 1959, and somewhere beneath that snow lies the truth silent, buried, and waiting. As the searchers pieced together the strange locations of the bodies, one fact became painfully clear. Something had driven the hikers out of the tent in a blind panic. No shoes, no jackets. Some barely clothed in sub-zero temperatures. This wasn't just a mistake. It was madness or terror. The tent had been slashed open from the inside, not from the outside. This suggested that the hikers had cut their way out of the tent in haste, unwilling or unable to use the front flap. And from there, they scattered into the wilderness, some running toward the tree line, others crawling or staggering into the darkness. But why? Theories began to swirl, each stranger than the last. Was it an avalanche? Some experts suggested a sudden slab avalanche could have startled the hikers, but investigators found no clear evidence of one, and the slope wasn't steep enough to support a large avalanche. Plus, an avalanche doesn't explain the extreme internal injuries in some of the body's injuries, described as being like those in a car crash with no external trauma. And it certainly doesn't explain why the hikers fled barefoot into the cold. The avalanche theory, while neat, left too many holes. Others turned to the idea of infrasound, a rare meteorological phenomenon where wind conditions create low-frequency sound waves. Some scientists propose that these frequencies can cause intense physical discomfort, hallucinations, or panic. Could the hikers have been unknowingly driven mad by sound? Their minds disoriented as they fled into the night, but again, This fails to explain the traumatic physical injuries, or the fractured ribs and crushed skulls. It also assumes that all 9 people would react the same way, which seems unlikely. Then came the more chilling possibilities. Military involvement was whispered about, especially as investigators noted strange metallic fragments near the site. Some said the Soviet military had been testing parachute mines devices that detonate midair with a concussive blast that could explain the internal injuries with no external wounds. But where were the burn marks? Why would a secret military test happen near a well-known hiking route? And if it was a test gone wrong, why leave the bodies to be discovered? Still others proposed that the hikers had encountered something or someone they weren't supposed to. Some kind of classified weapon, a radioactive experiment. The radioactivity found on some clothing added fuel to that fire. But the radiation wasn't consistent, it was only found on a couple of garments, and it wasn't high enough to be deadly. The explanation might have been simpler. One of the hikers worked in a facility with radioactive materials, possibly contaminating their clothes. That didn't stop conspiracy theorists from running wild. The final and most otherworldly theory involves extraterrestrial contact. Locals in nearby areas reported strange orange lights in the sky. Around the time of the hikers' deaths, was it a missile, a rocket launch, or something not of this Earth? The orange lights were officially explained as our 7th missile test from Baikonur Cosmodrome, but some believe they were cover-ups, visible signs of alien involvement. After all, the hikers' strained behavior and mutilated bodies couldn't be explained by natural forces. This theory is obviously the most controversial and the least provable, but for many, it added a layer of horror to an already haunting story in a place called Dead Mountain. Was it so crazy to think something unnatural had occurred? Amid all the chaos of the theories, some still clung to a simpler explanation: hypothermia and poor judgment. The hikers panicked over something, maybe even just a perceived threat, and fled. Disoriented, underdressed, and exposed to brutal cold, they succumbed one by one, but that theory still doesn't explain the crushed ribs or the missing tongue, or the fact that seasoned hikers with survival experience would flee without even grabbing boots. Every plausible theory answered one part of the mystery and left another part in shadow. In the decades since, researchers, scientists, and amateur sleuths have pored over the case. Books were written, documentaries produced, even modern simulations created to test avalanche models. But every explanation still feels incomplete, like trying to finish a puzzle with missing pieces. The Dyatlov Pass Incident became more than a mystery, it became a cultural obsession. A symbol of how little we sometimes understand the forces of nature and the human mind under pressure. And over time, it blurred the line between reality and legend. With each retelling, the hikers became characters in a myth. Their photos, recovered from cameras at the site, show smiles, friendships, and warmth. Yet their final hours remain unspeakably cold, terrifying, and unknowable. Families of the dead were given only partial information. The Soviet government closed the case quickly, attributing the deaths to an unknown compelling force. That phrase itself became iconic, a haunting, open-ended conclusion. Unknown compelling force. It could mean anything. It invites speculation without offering answers. That's why this case endures, not because we're close to solving it, but because we're not. Because the truth, whatever it is, continues to elude us. The more you study it, the stranger it gets. Every new theory adds another layer. Every discovery raises more questions than it answers, and yet, we keep returning to it. We look at that frozen slope, that slashed tent, those broken bodies, and we need to know. But perhaps the mountain will never give up its secrets. Perhaps the hikers died in fear, confusion, never understanding what they were fleeing from. Perhaps something chased them, real or imagined. Or perhaps they simply ran from the cold and it caught them. Either way, they left behind something larger than themselves. A story, a mystery, a cautionary tale carved into the ice, a question still echoing in the wind of Dead Mountain. The mystery of the Dyatlov Pass Incident has spawned dozens of theories, ranging from scientific to supernatural. Some believe it was an avalanche, while others suggest government cover-ups, military experiments, or even alien contact. Let's look at the most prominent explanations. The avalanche theory suggests the hikers heard a rumble in the night and panicked. Fearing a wall of snow, they slashed their tent and fled into the darkness, poorly dressed. This could explain the chaos and some injuries, but not all. Critics argue that the slope wasn't steep enough for a full avalanche. And why would season? Mountaineers flee in such an unorganized way if they'd simply expected snow. The bodies were found far from the tent, not huddled together as you'd expect in a survival effort. Another theory involves infrasound. Low-frequency sound waves generated by wind passing over the mountain. Some researchers suggest it can trigger feelings of panic or dread in humans. The hikers may have experienced irrational fear and fled. But this doesn't explain the severe physical trauma some of them suffered. It also leaves out the odd details like radiation on their clothing and missing eyes and tongues. Could fear alone really lead to such carnage? Then there's the theory of military involvement. Some say the group stumbled upon secret weapons, testing or parachute mines. That would explain the internal injuries without external wounds, shock waves from explosions. Eyewitnesses in nearby villages reported strange orange orbs in the sky. Could these have been military, flares, or rockets? Or were these something else entirely? The radioactive traces on some clothing fueled speculation of nuclear involvement, but the origin of the radiation was never fully explained, and the Soviet government was notably secretive during the investigation. A few even point towards supernatural theories. The local Mansi people spoke of the mountain being cursed. They called it Kolat, the mountain of the dead. Others suspect animal attacks or even madness brought on by the harsh environment. But again, the injuries were far too severe and selective to match a wild animal encounter, and the group showed no signs of mental instability prior to the trip. In 2019, Russia reopened the case. By 2020, the official conclusion was a slab avalanche. They stated the hikers were caught off guard and fled, leading to their deaths. While plausible, this conclusion hasn't silenced critics. Many feel it was a convenient explanation to close the case. Too many questions remain unanswered. Why were their clothes cut off? Why was one hiker's tongue missing? Why such massive chest trauma, like they'd been hit by a car, without external wounds? Why was the campsite left in such haste? What about the orange tan on some of their skin? What caused their final panic in the dead of night? These questions have inspired books, documentaries, and endless internet debates. For some, the truth may be buried beneath snow and secrecy. For others, the mystery is part of what makes Dyatlov Pass so haunting. In the end, maybe we'll never know what truly happened that night. Maybe Dead Mountain keeps its secrets for a reason. Or maybe, just maybe, the truth is too strange for us to accept. Whatever the case, 9 young souls perished under chilling and still unexplained circumstances. Their story remains one of the most unsettling and enduring cold cases of the 20th century, a reminder that even in the modern world, the wilderness still holds terrifying notes. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you